Recording. Good. I can now see it is
Now it
recording.
is started.
Yep.
Yeah. And can you see the screen now?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Good. So, guys, welcome. It's a pleasure to take another session with you all. Uh, the session kind of emanated through a discussion that me and Shubham had, where I personally felt through a series of mocks that people love talking about geopolitics as an hobby interest. Also, these types of topics are pretty common in VATs or extempores that happens across caps, calls, MDIs, and other places. So it made sense for us to do a session on it. Uh, at the very outset, let me state on a very cautious note, I'm no geopolitical expert. Neither I'm someone who knows it all. All I can do is give you a sense of how you can handle and what topics can you prepare well for your potential VAT interview questions on geopolitics or GD questions or extempores that can come on geopolitics, and to clear some of the misconceptions that stand for geopolitics in people's head, so that you don't go down uh, badly in your mock interview or situation where you misconstruct what geopolitics means, confuse it with diplomacy, which is just a method in which international affairs are conducted, or confuse other basic terms and terminologies related to geopolitics. I have a set of slides in front of me to just help me guide through this session. At the same time, I will encourage, if you have questions, you raise your hands, unmute, and ask. It's tough for me as sharing scheme to read the chat messages. They just pop and fade away. So it's very hard to keep a track of them. So I will definitely try to look at them to the end of the session. That being started, wait, maybe, or let's not waste time. We are already 6 minutes late. Uh, what is geopolitics? I would have preferred asking this as a generic question out to the entire audience and would have sought one or two volunteers to answer it. But let's not do it because we have some meat to cover. And so geopolitics is something which can be defined as geography, economics, demography influencing politics, international relations, and business decisions. Now, this might not be the standard definition, but what I'm trying to say that geopolitics is not just international relations. It's not just international politics. It's not just certain international affairs or knowing them. It's a comprehensive study where a lot of attributes and factors like geography, like economics, like demography influence a lot of decisions which are international relations related, business decisions which relate to investments in certain geographies or not, right? Or which influence politics of that country. So for example, when you're talking about India and China, the very similar demography, but India being a younger demography, there's a divide between India and China when it comes to the Himalayas that act as a natural barrier or a natural border between the two nations, right? The Chinese landmass is far away from the Himalayas, whereas the Indian landmass is right at the foothills of the Himalayas, not that far away. So all these complex factors, attributes, determine geopolitics. Uh, it's the analysis of political, geographical, economic, and other factors that influence the relationship between two nations, group, multilateral groups, or bilateral groups. Right? Bilateral means between two. Bilateral it means involves multiple nationalities. Right? Uh, Again, I've given the secondary definition. Again, these are not standard definitions, but geopolitics is the relation between nations and the forces that are determining the friendly or hostile relations. We all know we have hostile relationships with our neighbor, especially our western neighbor, Pakistan, right? Because of variety of reasons. There is a historical angle to it. There is a border conflict, geographical angle to it. There's a demographic angle to it. Like several other forces, factors contribute to that. Third point is very important. Geopolitics is not merely international relations, which is often I've seen people confusing. Now, that being said, why I'm taking this session also is I have an interest in geopolitics, but I've never said it out loud in my interview rooms. What I said in all my interview rooms is I have a proclivity towards reading about international affairs and events, sometimes international news. And I gave them a few examples of newspapers that I prefer reading, or articles of certain newspapers that I prefer reading to develop that point of view. So that made it at the very outset clear that I'm no geopolitics student. All I have is an interest and curiosity towards international relations and affairs, so that I was not pushed too much into this vast sea. But that being said, if some people are genuinely interested in these things, they understand it well enough, they read well enough around it. Welcome to say geopolitics as a interest. Why also geopolitics is important? I can tell you, as MBA graduates, you will be taking certain decisions of mergers, acquisitions, deals, sometimes even opening organic, ventures out in different geographies, whether it is Southeast Asia, whether it's Middle East, whether it's Latin America, Europe, and what other places. And you might have to have certain sort of understanding on geopolitics. I'm Bangalore. I can tell you from the my own experience, it's tough for me to comment on other IIMs on that front, but I am Bangalore at least have 5, 6 uh, really good courses which kind of delve into the realm of geopolitics and business. One such example is I've given that I don't know whether this elective still happens to be there, but the highly case-driven elective, which is doing business in risky countries, countries like Venezuela and all. Now, risky is also defined in a very clear way in this course. There's a risk index that gets published, and you see that, and you define risk in different countries. And many Indian large conglomerates operate out of some of these geographies for their raw material sourcing and others. So you, at some point in time, some of you would have to take certain decisions on international affairs, and it's that's why it's important to understand a bit of geopolitics. This is the bottom line. Be very careful when you state your interest in geopolitics. It's not simply international affairs. It's complex. Uh, and that's why I said clarify you like to explore geopolitics as you love reading international news and events and international affairs. That is a better phrasing verbatim that you can give rather than saying you like geopolitics without understanding it. That has happened at least in 2 or 3 mocks that I've seen. I might be making a generalization bias out here, but I'm stating it out loud because when I was you, I would not have understood these things. It's only when I am here, maybe with certain bit more reading and understanding, that I'm commenting why is it different, right? Uh, just to give you another anecdotal evidence why geopolitics has become very important. Somebody who would follow this is an FT article. This is, I think, I don't know what date it is, but it's not very far off in the time horizon. It's 4 or 5 months ago when Goldman Sachs decided to open an institute for geopolitics because they wanted to advise their clients on investment decisions and other things by weighing down the risks that existed in certain geographies and predicting certain geopolitical events. Because for the last few years, starting with the COVID pandemic, uh, though that was a healthcare crisis, but it also brought in certain other challenges of friction between nations as well. Post that, Russia, Ukraine, and other subsequent geopolitical crises have kind of made people realize, especially businesses, that they need to factor in geopolitical risks and understand it. So Goldman Sachs is not alone. There are other investment banks like Lazard, which have institutes or specific divisions that study geopolitics and advise their clients and publish reports. So just to give you anecdotal evidence out there that it's becoming important. Uh, let's start with what matters to you. Not a comprehensive list, but I think would suffice for your preparation for this season. Comprehensive geopolitical topics that I can think of for 2024 include the Russia, Ukraine, and the larger Russia NATO tensions or the Russia US tensions. The US and China, which has been simmering for a long time now, uh, uh, perhaps almost for a decade in different variety and forms. Rise of China and its impact on Asia. As an Indian, I think you would appreciate that very much. That there is a sense of friction between the two neighbors, India and China as well. India, Maldives, a case in point. A lot of you love to talk about it. I've also given you a Discord message that if you're talking about it, read about Operation Cactus as well to get a historical context. Evolving structures within the Middle East, the Israel-Palestine, which is ongoing, the Israel-Hamas, if I can call it, these changing role of Saudi Arabia, Iran, uh, Iran's friction with a lot of nations, including the US, Saudi Arabia, and the US. A lot has been simmering there as well. India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor, some new developments out there where especially a development against the backdrop of One Belt, One Road initiative, which is the classic Chinese infrastructure ambitious plan that they had for two distinct trade routes that they wanted to revive and remake. And Africa and Latin America. Latin America, Brazil and Argentinian elections have been a topic of concern. Africa, I myself not very thorough with. I didn't feel anything very significant happening out there that you should be really worried about. But that being said, all of these topics are important, but you don't need to be an expert in all of it. Reading a bit about it is going to help you out. Secondly, if you operate in an industry which deals with some of these geographies, maybe some of you have had work experience or clients in these domains and others, maybe a tad bit more familiarity is expected, not around geopolitics, but around culture and several other issues of those geographies. Even if you have traveled a bit and if you state travel as a hobby and if you have traveled to certain geographies in the Middle East or Europe and others, maybe a bit more understanding is expected out there. Not of geopolitics in general, I'm just emphasizing on the fact that not everyone is on the same level when it comes to every single domain, right? Chemical engineering would definitely go better chemical engineering, say, from electrical engineering. So their levels in their expertise in different domains is different. But uh, in case you want to have that sort of understanding, these are the reasonably exhaustive list of topics that you could cover, right? What Look, I've given you the topics. These topics are wide topics. All of these topics, if you start Googling around, there is at least hundreds years of history and events and things that have happened in these geopolitical affairs, right? How far you need to go, what you need to understand. I don't think so you need to go deep into it. All you need to know is, on a broader sense, what is their impact on the global economy, because that, as a business graduate, should matter to you. The inflation, the trade issues, business operations, the supply chain and risk of operations that can happen with that. Impact on world peace. Wars are great disruptors of world peace. And of course, when world peace gets disrupted, businesses, governments, everything gets affected. So these are the broader threats I would say you need to be aware of, without going into much detail. But definitely a certain historical context helps, because that gives you a sense of why the thing is happening, what is happening. I'll just give you a brief of each of these issues, so that this session you get to gain something out of it. Uh, Also, what I can do is possibly also share this deck after the session is there. Now, there could be factual errors in it. If there are, is free to comment and correct me. As I said, I'm no expert in geopolitics. I'm just commenting from a certain understanding of how geopolitics can be asked in an MBA interview. That's what I'm doing here. No way I can be compared to a Brookings or other think tanks that comment right on geopolitical interventions. They know much more than I could even claim to know, right? But Russia, Ukraine, to start with, is a very boiling topic, has been a boiling topic. 2022, Russia decided to annex Ukraine. Since then, it has been a war which is still continuing, with deep and long-standing impact on everyone. In fact, if someone is interested in reading a bit about history, a bit about uh, humanity and in general, and is a fan of *Sapiens* as a book, *Homo Deus* as a book by Yuval Noah Harari, I suggest there was a good article that came out long back in FT, when Russia decided to annex Ukraine, on how that impacts the way our society and world was getting structured, our global order was getting structured, that Russia's actions impact, right? Uh, Also, to give a rider here, which I think would be important for a critical analysis perspectives, a lot of geopolitics, the way we understand it, also influence through what lens we are looking at. And by lens, I mean what narratives we are reading. And that's where it's very important. So largely the common consumption that we will have across India would be a consumption of an English friendly media, which would be the likes and ilks of top international publications to domestic publications, which craft careful narratives that perhaps suit some of their local politics and other reasons, right? Or their funders or their backers. In that case, maybe you need to be cautious of the fact that the narrative that I'm reading is one version of that truth. Uh, because you're not well versed with, say, Russian language, you might not understand what a perspective Russia might have in this case, right? So the value of knowing that there's a narrative angle here, that whatever you read is a version of truth, is also very important, and it's a good critique point and a good point to know, to understand that you should be open to a variety of perspectives out there. So just to give you a broader sense of Russia-Ukraine, it started with this annexation of Crimea by Russia, but I think the biggest flashpoint has been the 2022 action. Immediately when the world thought that COVID was getting over, if I'm right, 2020 is when COVID struck. 2021 hopes had started burgeoning in terms of the vaccine being deployed at massive scales across the globe, travel resuming, business sentiment rising, and suddenly February 2022, you see a flashpoint like this, which disrupted a lot more things, right? Russia decided to, annex Ukraine, which is a former Soviet republic. If you know, there was a United Soviet Republic, USSR, that previously existed. They had their own reasons. Ukraine and Russia, they have had a common bond. And it has been a complex history. If you read down a few certain things, that 1918 is Ukraine declares independence from Russia. Soviet forces again overthrow independent Ukraine, and the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic is formed. Stalin's policies create a lot of famine and other issues within Ukraine, and then when the Cold War ended, Ukraine again became independent, right? And as of where we stand today, it's the war is still ongoing. It has led to a lot of issues across the globe, supply chain issues in terms of gas, energy, and other things. It has led to food grain issues. The world's food supply; these were very strong food supplies of wheat across the globe, which got impacted. Another aspect of this is, if you are interested in geopolitics and if you're going to say that out in the interview, I expect you to at least go and Google the maps to see slightly from a terrain, from a geography, from neighboring point of view perspective, what all countries border these countries, how is the terrain and other things. That's just to give you a more broader understanding of how geopolitics functions. Till now, am I making sense? Am I clear? Any doubts that you might have? I don't want to be the only one talking for a very long time here. Okay, I see a lot of thumbs up. I mean, I think then it's going in the right direction. Yeah,
I had
go
a
ahead.
question.
Go ahead. Oh, who is this? Can you say your name? I can't see you.
Abhijat.
Abhijat, go ahead.
Sir, you mentioned that we can just read a brief about the topic.
Yes.
But I have come to know that IIFT, like if I'm shortlisted, it goes.
IFT will ask. Good question,
Yeah,
Abhijat.
so how thorough should we be when we are reading from IIFT perspective?
IFT is a trade specific school. They tend to go deep. I remember I converted IFT too, but IFT is notorious for that. In that case, I think there will be a point when you don't know, and it happened with me as well. It happens with a lot of other people. That's the flavor. They are a foreign trade expertise school. They might want to push you, but for an IFT specific preparation, I would expect, on certain topics of global trade, you need to read a bit more than for all these topics. I suggest just reading Wikipedia and certain small links, maybe one or two good news articles, is you're good to go. For IFT, I would suggest going slightly deeper, going maybe 10 levels deeper into Wikipedia, so not just reading Wikipedia, reading 10 more links associated with it, and maybe 4 or 5 more news articles. That gives you a sense in your head what is happening. Then you can at least follow through at least 2 to 3 questions. At one point, since you're not a geopolitical expert, you will reach a point where you don't know. That is fine. But if you can defend your stand to a significant point, it helps you out. And secondly, your communications, your confidence, and that energy and other things also make an impact out there. Between in front of the panel, they don't want experts out either. If you are an expert already, why you want to go to IFT, right? You want to learn a certain things out there, right?
Right. And also like the list of topics, like going deeper and having a more extensive knowledge, I understand regarding the list of topics, like you mentioned in the previous slide.
Yeah.
Is that sufficient, or should we go to
I
like the
think US, China, Russia, Ukraine, and India, Middle East Economic Corridor, Europe Economic Corridor should be more than sufficient for an IFT.
all right, all right.
Yeah, yeah.
And will they like, so in that there was like Russia Ukraine is a hot topic, but in the uh, will they also ask like topics from regarding to, let's say, the US election? So what is happening over there, since there are US elections is a big news in 2024.
As
So
long as it impacts trade, they might ask. It depends on how much you want to know. I don't think so. They will venture too much into US elections, right? Anyway, it's so uncertain right now that nobody knows what's happening there. Except that people are now getting more confident. It's between Trump and Biden. Rod DeSantis
right,
is perhaps out of the league
and
now.
Nikki Haley is also there. So yeah,
They were anyway not. I from my reading, it was I think Rod DeSantis, the Florida governor, who was being called as proper,
uh,
Republican candidate who could have done. But with Biden aging, Trump under a lot of lawsuits and all, it's become complex. Uh,
yeah,
what they might not ask you is what is the outcome or how it will play out. Perhaps what they might expect is read a bit one or two articles, how it can impact the trade relations and other things. That could be helpful, but I don't think so. They will venture into American elections a lot. See, most of the global trade anchors around China still, and so knowing a bit about China and trade is helpful.
sir. And what about the US, like the Fed's hiking the interest rates or some or
That's a common topic. That's not even geopolitics. That's more macroeconomics, global economy. Across the
okay,
world, central banks have hiked interest rates.
right?
It's because there was too much liquidity led to a lot of inflation, and the only way to control inflation through monetary policy is hike interest rates. That's what Fed has been doing for a time being now. That's a macroeconomics. It's not a
Okay,
geopolitical topic.
and
Yeah.
how much will they go in history? Like another topic which I remember is like the Silicon Valley bank collapse.
Yes.
So
That's
can
not
they?
history. That's very recent.
I mean, like not history. I mean the recent, as in that was 2022, right?
SVB
So can they?
SVB SVB Fallout is a recent topic.
Yeah,
I would say in that sense, see SVP Fallout, being aware of it is one thing. A
okay,
potential topic that I feel SVB folks might get it is from the angle of social media risk. That a bank could collapse out of a social media panic that got generated, right?
okay, right,
And that's where I think new generation of managers need to be aware of that social media today is a very, very prominent and a very, very veritable risk out there. People can
okay,
shoot a video and put it on Twitter. It becomes viral, and suddenly company sales go down. Company has to come out defend. There are lawsuits, so it's a very veritable risk. And from a managerial point of view, they might expect people to understand social media a bit. So that is an angle I would prefer people knowing more than the event, which was SBB Fallout and subsequent financial contagion that happened across some banks. Not every bank, but some small
yeah, yeah.
banks.
There was one more bank collapse last year in the
Yes,
US,
yes. It's a small contagion which happened across this.
right?
Okay,
So
moving
let's.
on, moving on. Yeah, Abhijat, let's reserve your questions now for the end because I
Okay,
think
okay.
it will eat up the time. Uh, Moving on to the Russia Ukraine, I think what the strand on economic impact or the global economy impact, there were disruptions in trade and supply chains. As I said, wheat exporting and other things got impacted. The energy crisis, you would have heard statements about our dashing foreign minister talking about that we will continue to purchase from Russia for our energy security, whereas Europe kind of pointing us down that why are we funding the war by purchasing Russian gas because they are a prime supplier. So that was one of other thing. Another thing which was an impact was there was a heightened uncertainty. People things were recovering from COVID, and suddenly this war created a hell lot of uncertainty around financial markets and other things. And specifically Europe, there was a huge dependency in terms of their energy security, which got impacted, right? So that's impact from the Russia-Ukraine war. You need to know what's the future outlook look like. It's uh, it's going to be a long war. It's still ongoing. It's going to go. There doesn't seem to be a simple way out here, right? Uh, what is important to understand is Ukraine has been fighting relentlessly. Their will is still not broken. For folks interested in history, there's a very good Netflix documentary, World War II in History. And I think there's a chapter on Battle of Stalingrad that you might want to just watch. In war, a defeat eventually happens when the will of the people gets broken and they become subdued to a foreign power or a foreign enemy. Which is why when people in their, you know, breakfast table talks and drawing room talks talk about that, you can bomb your way out of Pakistan. They don't realize that it's easy to say that on a geopolitical front, it's very complex. Firstly, international sanctions. Secondly, a large population. Where will that migrate? Where will the refugees come along? The only porous border that they have is either Afghanistan or India, right? How will India handle that? And secondly, can you break the will of the people there to really conquer them? So these are complex topics, and it's really hard to give a decisive judgment. In this case, Ukraine's wills were not broken. They fought back, continue to fight back, right? Interestingly, another topic which I think I've not mentioned here is Russia war also brought in front a very interesting topic. I don't think so it will come in an MBA interview, but just for geopolitics enthusiasts, the role of private military contractors, PMCs, in the wars. If you have read news in the past 6-7 months, the Wagner Group and their chief then dying in an airplane crash, who kind of revolted against Vladimir Putin. PMCs were heavily being used in military, but it got kind of in the forefront with this, where defense is generally a topic of the state. Indian Army is owned by, no, owned is a wrong word, but Indian Army is being the topmost authority is the President of India and the elected cabinet. They're a professional army who reports to that. It's not private military which reports to a private entity or something like that. But for wars abroad, a lot of countries, including China, including US, have in past engaged contractors, PMCs. If someone has seen Game of Thrones, at some point in time, I forgot the incest person of the Lannister family, who was the queen later on. Cersei Lannister engages the Golden Army as private military contractors to fight war on their behalf. So has been a historical context where people pay for military, getting military on contract. It was a common concept for a lot of Iraq war that US played. China also uses it. But Russia, the war, I think the Wagner Group got into forelight. So just for geopolitics enthusiasts, right? The West unity in terms of supporting Ukraine is also slightly weakening. With Trump coming, this might also change further, right? If Trump comes in, right? So that's again a sign that this war could prolong and might play out not so favorably in the favor of Ukraine. As I said, a negotiated settlement is a possible outcome, but seems far from now. And it's a very uncertain, complex situation that's playing out. So future outlook is very uncertain, very complex right now. Coming on to another important topic, which is the US-China. As I said, every single issue that you pick here will have a very long history. At least 100 years old history. Same as with US-China. It's been a long history. For people to know, US-China were allies against the Japanese imperialist forces back then in World War II, because I don't know how many of you have if I'm right, I keep forgetting names, so but I think it was the Ninjang or some massacre that Japanese forces did in China, which is still remembered as a day of mourning for them, where a complete city was plundered by the Japanese imperialist forces. So in that case, US allied with China to be against the Japanese forces. But then communist forces started taking over in China. The People's Republic of China was formed, and that was the era of McCarthyism in US, where there was a strong distaste for communism, especially because of USSR, and they wanted democracy, which didn't happen. So this relationship got strained. Then things changed post 1970s. People who might have seen the movie recently, the Vicky Kaushal one on Sam Manekshaw, Field Marshal Sam Manekshaw, would have realized that there was a character called Henry Kissinger, one of the most celebrated diplomats, not in the Indian eyes perhaps, but globally considered a celebrated diplomat, who also died very recently. right? He was very instrumental in getting US and China closer. This was the Nixon era. And US China became strong trade partners only till the time in the last decade or so when US realized that they are running a huge deficit from China. Uh, there are issues on in trade infringement and other things. There are several other issues which bothers us now, and that has been then since then a strained relationship for vying for the global superpower, uh, global leader. Both countries are trying to do that. Even if you see news articles would talk about BYD versus the Tesla in terms of electric vehicles, and Chinese company versus an American company, even though Tesla would be making much more revenues and profits by selling premier segments, and BYD on that sense manufacturing economical cars, but at the same time, uh, catering to a large domestic market, right? They will be talking about US, China on multiple things because China has been progressing pretty fast on several issues, right? Uh, what is the status quo? Status quo means what's the current standing position. Uh, Trade is a point of contention between both the countries. Intellectual property theft, semiconductor wars, and whatnot. Uh, there have been instances where US has import tariffs on Chinese goods, also put restrictions on raw materials that could be taken into China to manufacture a few things. Uh, Simply because they felt that they violate and infringe on patent rights and other things, and don't comply with a lot of international norms and other things that exist, right? China's military activity has been a cause of concerns. They've established military bases and presence in Latin American nations like Venezuela and others to South China Sea, Taiwan Strait, Maldives, for example, a case in point. And that's the maritime superiority is also a point of concern for the United States at some point in time. They also clearly threaten some of the US allies like Japan and others, right? The human rights situation in the Xinjiang and Hong Kong, if you go back slightly 2 3 years back, there have been a lot of protests in Hong Kong which were slightly brutally handled, as well as multiple reports around the Uyghur Muslims and the concentration camps that have existed. Again, I will warn and caution you that this is a frame or lens or a narrative that we are reading from the US perspective because that is widely available. Maybe if you read a publication which is largely a Chinese publication, you would have a very different view. So narrative plays a very important here. Uh, the only counter narrative that I can put here in favor of China is China is concerned about American hegemony. They decide what is right, then they act on it. They sometimes seems like the moral becoming power on the entire globe, without sometimes setting an example themselves. And they're concerned about it, and they want to develop a multipolar world, a nucleus of power. Uh, Critical analysis point of view, one needs to think: can it be really possible? Because English is the lingua franca across the globe. American universities still dominate as the go-to destinations for large number of international students. So their hegemony is pretty large and significant. It's not so easy to break out, especially with a nation where the language is pretty constricted. Where not a lot of people know Mandarin. A lot of not Chinese universities are accessible to international students, or people go there, right? In that case, America has been kind of a free capitalist market with a lot of opportunities. Don't see that happening with China as well. So global hegemony is a tough topic, right? The future outlook, it's going to be a continued turbulence. It's not any easy solution. Recent incidents, I think you must have all read about the spy balloon. The spy balloon, which hot air balloon, which was sighted in the US. I think one was shot down by the US Air Force. And the semiconductor disputes, military rivalry in the oceans is not going away anywhere. What is required is that any of this competition should not turn into a conflict. Much like Russia did with Ukraine, China shouldn't. Perhaps if it does with Taiwan, we might see some flashpoints out there, like the Taiwan annexation, South China Sea, right? Uh, Presidential election outcome could complicate issues. Both nations. Geopolitics, one important factor that happens is your local politics also determines it, right? And both of them are facing different issues, variety of issues in their own countries, which will lead to a different narrative war and different stance and positioning that they will take, right? So that's the US China. Any quick question till now, or is it what I'm saying? Is it making sense till now? Yes, somebody has a raised hand. Please go ahead.
Hi, sir. So my name is Nishan.
Yeah,
So,
go ahead.
so I am loving the way you're explaining the things. So I just had a quick question.
Yeah,
Like, suppose there are instances where we are, forced to take a stand upon issues like these.
yeah.
So, to be morally and ethically very correct, so what stance should we take in such cases?
For all stands, Nishan, I will tell you, it also did comes from your own vantage point. For example, if I have to give you a personal example, I would not say war is a solution, but when somebody asks me about India and Pakistan, my own vantage point comes from a very different viewpoint where I have matlab, for me it's a very difficult relationship. I can't it's very hard for me to take sides with our enemy, right? In that case. So that's my vantage point. So my verbatim will change on that. Now these are fairly neutral issues for India, US, China, Russia, Ukraine. In that case, you won't be forced to take sides, but whenever you're forced to take sides, you can say that, okay, from the limited set of information that I have, maybe if you support Russia because of the NATO threat that Russia was facing, right? That they decided to take on this action. Maybe you said the war is not a solution, which is what our Indian stand has been, that diplomatic channels should always be used to solve such issues. But you do, from your vantage point and the limited information that you have, you agree to an extent that there was a NATO threat that Russia was facing, and that's why they got to an extreme step. So in that case, you can show that your tilt is towards a stand, but you are also acknowledging the fact that I'm no expert and I have limited information. From what that limited information, I'm taking this stand. So that's a verbatim that I would suggest, even for
Got
the
it, sir.
back.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Coming on to a topic of good interest amongst people, we are Indians. We understand Indian issues better. Bharat and China. Some people might smile at my usage of the word Bharat. That's been a topic. India that is Bharat. In fact, Jay Shankar has just published a book, Why Bharat Matters. So, kind of reclaiming a age-old legacy of our old name. So I'm just putting India and Bharat both are synonymous in names. We both represent the same country. And India often referred to as elephant, and the Chinese often referred to as the dragon. So just a usage of word. As I said, historical context is important, but in this India and China, this is thousands of years old relationships. I'm not sure I've not mentioned it here, but there used to be a Central Asian Silk trade route, and a lot of other things that connected India and China. A lot of Buddhist travelers coming across to study at Nalanda and Takshashila and Vikramshilas. And there are written, recorded evidences of those within India, right? So it's a long held relationship. A lot of Buddhist influence emanating out of India to Central Asia, to the steppes, to the Bactrian Peninsula region, to many other regions, and then the Byzantines, the Ottoman empires, everything came in, and largely Central Asia then interestingly became of a different religion altogether. Buddhist relics not so prevalent in others. So complex historical relationship. Same as with India, China, that you have had a very complex history, and but we're not delving into that history. All we can say is if it comes as a VAT topic or a PI topic, that's an age-old civilizational history that we have with China. That being said, the modern relations started in the 1950s. When India was one of the first nations to establish diplomatic relations with China, because China was a communist government. US was very anti-China in that sense. Pandit Nehru took a stand and developed a friendly relationships with China and diplomatic relationships. The Panchsheel Agreement, Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai, all of this broke down with the 1962 Sino in China, Sino-India War. A war I think some of my maternal grandfathers apparently were part, not technically in the war front, but contributing to it to some extent, right? Uh, China is also India's largest trading partner, perhaps only after the US. And we both kind of compete for raw materials, technologies, global market accesses. India also wants to gain a lot of global market accesses for their trading, for their goods. So does China. China, with some lead and advantage in terms of their infrastructure, is definitely ahead. So they can produce cheap, good material, good stuff, and sell it across. But India also is trying to heavily compete for that global market access. They also kind of conflict with their dominance in the Indian Ocean and the global South, right? Global South being the Africa, Southeast Asia, Latin America. which is kind of a new terminology, right? People used to talk about the East and the West. Now they also talk about the global South, right? And both of these countries. So you saw India kind of getting African Union part of the G20 during their presidency, to China making huge investments in Africa and Latin America, developing their space programs, developing their railways and other things. You read a lot of articles in Kenya where China is developing their railways, to articles about Venezuela and South American nations where they're developing their space programs as well, right? Uh, and there's been military, maritime conflicts with India and China. More important incidents recently, which really made relationships sour, is the border skirmishes with China from their territorial expansion strategy has been trying to invade into Indian patrolling points and others, led to a very deadly Galwan incident where brave Jawans got martyred from the Indian side. No, I think martyred is not a term they use, so I might be politically incorrect. Achieved Shaheed or Veer Gati in that conflict, and same with the 2017 Doklam conflict, which happened in the Bhutan, because that's a strategic chicken neck problem for India, where China could actually cut down our access to Northeast. Uh, Indian Maldives, there's a China's angle. I think all of you are aware of the Chinese angle. Someone has raised a hand. Please go ahead.
Sir, I want to ask this India and China
Yeah.
from a perspective of Dalai Lama. So I think the stone which started all these things were like Dalai Lama taking refuge in India.
Yeah.
So how would you like to say what would be the situation after Dalai Lama? Would India and China not can their relation be back to normal?
Yeah, so it's a complex question. Let me quickly answer it, and maybe if we have time in the end, I will answer it more details. This is a historical issue that India, the Tibetan annexation by the Chinese, India decided to give in Tibetan government an exile and gave refuge to Dalai Lama. And that has been India's position till the India has always been against territorial expansion. That no country should infringe upon sovereign territorial borders that they are defined. In both cases, India and Pakistan, India and China, our borders are not defined so very well. And there are conflicting points where we disagree on the borders that exist. China claims that they have more area, India claims that this is their area, right? With Dalai Lama, India, that was a friction point for China, continues to remain so. But off late, interestingly, if you have been reading news, Dalai Lama's own statements on Tibetan position has been kind of very mellowed down towards China. So things are possibly changing where India might not have this Tibet as a conflict point between when India and China negotiate on a table. So for them, they have given refuge to Dalai Lama, that's a fact, but it's not a flashpoint or standing conflicting point between India and China. And I think even the Tibetan Dalai Lama is kind of accepting and mellowing down its tone. So that's been the recent development. I'm no geopolitical expert to comment on that. But if you want to learn more around it, I say for every topic there's Wikipedia that's going to help you out and read a few more angles to it. Okay, moving forward, India Maldives, a lot of people talked about it. This is a very recent event around the new president who got elected, who is kind of India out, pro-China, and there have been Indian military has been asked to leave. Only thing I felt as a shortcoming in a lot of your answers in the mock that people gave is you're not aware of the historical context of the military being present there. Like no country would prefer a foreign military power to be stationed in their country, right? India would not prefer that. Countries like Maldives and all, they don't have the manpower to and infrastructure resources to do that, so they might want some assistant out there. But the bedrock of that military presence was a military coup that happened in 1988 when Indian RAW actually played a big role, and I think the then Prime Minister also got involved and decided to help out a Maldives friendly president to thwart that coup attempt that was there. In Indian military since then is largely placed for training humanitarian purposes, but that's the historical context with which there is an anti-Indian military sentiment also there, right? Another hot topic which is out there is Israel-Palestine, which people talk about, especially the Houthi rebels and other things. Abhishek, you have raised hand. Please go ahead.
I just wanted to ask why it is called Operation Cactus and why not some other name.
Man, that's something I don't know. I don't know. So
Okay,
practically, that's the answer I can give.
yeah, I'll try
Uh,
digging up.
yeah, you try digging it, but sometimes I think names don't come. See, I'm not sure what the name was for the Operation Balakot that happened, but operation that happened day after Balakot with the Pakistani side, the F-16s and JF-17s, was
Mhm.
called as Swift Retort, Operation Swift Retort. So
Okay.
that meant swiftly repelling or giving a response to the enemy. So that's what they wanted to do. And some famous operations that people like to read are Cactus, and then I
Mhm.
think I am forgetting the name, but this the famous Pervez Musharraf plan. I'm forgetting the name, but this has been there since the 80s of kind of cutting India by 1,000 cuts. Uh, I think. Operation Tupac. Tupac is the right name. Just Google it if I'm wrong. It's TUPAC. That was the Pakistani operation, which kind of funded and propelled and trained the secessionist movements within Kashmir region. Right. Israel Palestine, another hot topic. Deep historical conflict, as I said. Uh, so deep that it runs to thousands of years to a religious conflicts of the Abrahamic religions and other things, right? Uh, but all the recent happenings are kind of not so old, but still 100, 200 years old. I've given some of these facts. Given it's running short of time, I will not read all of them. What I will do is I'll share this deck so that some of you have some points to start your research with and read a bit if you are interested, right? And you know, this has been a complex issue of who owns Palestine and all, right? And there have been multiple wars that have been fought, with mostly Israel being victorious out of it, and moving the displacing the Palestinian people. Um, the 1973, I think, Yom Kippur War was very similar to what happened last year, or just after 50 years, where Hamas uh, led to an unprovoked attack in southern Israel, killing a lot of innocent civilians and others, which led to a formal declaration of war by Israeli. And since then, Israeli forces have been raging a war in that region. Uh, it has strained a lot of relations in Qatar. I just happened to read an FT, or I've bookmarked it. I've not read it fully. That Saudi Arabia is going to play a big role in mediator role out there in this war to make sure uh, consensus is reached, because there's now cries of a lot of humanitarian angles that are emerging out of that war, right? Some people love to talk about the Houthi rebels and other things, which is also a complex manifestation with Iran and others that is there, where Houthis, which are kind of supported or thought to be or perceived to be supported by Iran, have been bombing the commercial vessels, which have led the insurance premium, the supply, the rates for ships and commercial vehicles, that vessels that move through that Red Sea. That if you look at the map, that a small patch that opens and connects two oceans and otherwise you'll have to travel all the way down to Africa and then go the other side, right? That cuts down the distance. So they've been bombing some commercial vessels, and certainly US has started, and UK has started bombing those Houthi rebels. I see another raised hand. Whoever it is, please unmute and ask.
So regarding this issue,
Yeah.
most of the articles state that it originated in 1917, but
Yes.
would it be okay to go back further in history to perhaps the Ottoman Empire or
Yeah.
when the
If you,
Romans
if
invaded?
yeah. If you know about the Ottoman, Byzantine, and all that history, if you're fairly well read about it, I'd be fairly. If you're aware of it, it's good to go there. These things have very complex roots to that. So, it's just that people are not aware of it. That's why it's sometimes risky. But as I said, this articles will say, because this is a modern conflict, has been 100 year, 100 odd years called conflict, but it has very, very deep roots back to how many years you want to take it, right? So you can go in, no worries. If you've read about Ottomans, you've read books, you've watched TV series around Ottomans and all, good to go. Talk about it. Good topics to study, right?
Okay,
Uh, India,
thank you.
Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor. I just wanted to show you a label, because a lot of people read about it, don't understand the map. So just have a careful look at the map, where all It is going through from Mumbai to UAE to Saudi to Israel and to Greece, and subsequently through Greece to other European countries. It's a planned economic corridor, huge infrastructure investment, huge resource investment, still planning phase, but strong counter to what a One Belt, One Road initiative, which was China's ambitious plan, still ongoing. This is India and maybe slightly, if I can call, anti or neutralizing China voices that have come together to kind of develop a several plan. So if you know, India never participated in the OBOR, One Belt, One Road initiative. Citing it new age imperialism that China could impose through their means of, putting countries in heavy debt and loans, and subsequently taking over their properties and other things. And which is why you see India now, along with other like-minded nations, vying for a corridor. So it's a good point, a good thing to read about. Unlikely, very hot topic, but still a topic that you need to be aware of, because it's important geopolitical convergence, right? Africa, again, I say I am not very aware of African nations, but when it comes to Africa, all we know is that global south, there is interest in Africa for its resource richness. China has higher interest. I told that Kenyan railways and many other things that China is developing, and could that be a new sense of imperialism also, right? That region is also finding convergence with like-minded countries like India, Brazil, Turkey. I don't know how many people are aware that Turkey is now not called Turkey the way we used to spell it. It's
Yes,
Turkey.
Turkey.
Yeah, that's correct. That's going back to their perhaps Ottoman roots. Someone talked about Ottomans. Uh, it was a strong empire back then, right? And a classic event that happened with African Union was, everyone, I've shared this photo on the slide, where African Union got inducted as part of the G20, and you had the Prime Minister hugging I think this was the Senegal president who was the leader of the African Union, hugging him and welcoming him to G20 as an important force and voice. You can't ignore such a populous landmass with rich resources when you're talking about international affairs. When it comes to Latin America, again, a region I'm not so very thorough with, but I will just say what is Latin America. People should know that South America, Central America, and the islands of the Caribbeans. Most of these were the colonies of Spain, France, and Portugal. If somebody knows about these regions, you'll have the sense that they were the colonies of these countries. The prominent nations, there are many other nations. Some that I've listed on top of my head: Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Peru, Colombia, Cuba, Venezuela, Mexico, and others. They have large natural resources. China is also a strong trading partner. In fact, I think replacing the US as a largest trading partner. They're developing their space sectors and a lot of other industries out in that region. This region is complex because it is grappling with hyperinflation, high economic inequality. You read about, pick any country about in Latin America, you read about these things. In fact, Argentinian inflation is 140%, right? And that's why you saw a right-wing kind of a leader getting elected very recently in Argentina. That was a big news. A very different coalition that came into power. At the same time, a right-wing coalition kind of got defeated in Brazil with, I think, Jair Bolsonaro, who was the former president or prime minister, I don't know, president of Brazil, who got replaced with a former top populist leader, socialist kind of leader, Lula. And so quite of contradictory forces, typical politics happening in Latin America. Again, not very important, but I'm just giving you a flavor since we are covering a comprehensive canvas out here. Key multilateral institution that you need to be at least aware of, read a bit about it. What is this? Is United Nations, International Monetary Fund, World Bank, OECD, the Quad. There could be other lists, but at least knowing them also is helpful. Some other key terms. This happened with one of the mock PIs that I took, where people ventured into this left-right wing politics and then got down into a rabbit hole of not being able to define it properly, and kind of converted into a stress interview in that sense. But so I just wanted to give you a sense. The left and right politics are largely defined from a Western point of view, from the American and the French and other angles. In India, its manifestation is way too complex. So I don't agree with a lot of political scientists that very boldly, in a single stroke, prefer writing India that BJP is the right wing, Congress is the left wing. It's complex than that. But in general, a broad consensus, left wing is, you know, is a political spectrum which is upon social equality, hierarchy, socialism, and other things, wealth redistribution and all. Whereas right wing is largely related to capitalism, social conservatism, traditional values, and tradition. So, parties or ideologies that oppose, abortion or anti-abortion, right? Those stands would be right wing to parties that will go for LGBTQ and diverse gender rights would be kind of left wing. So that's how typically left and right wing is. It has religion, it has ideological angles to it, it has economic angles of capitalism, socialism to it. But it's way too complex. At least my understanding is way too complex for its manifestation in India. With that being said, I have completed in the right bang on time on what I wanted to cover. I now open the floors for question. At the same time, I will look at the list of chat messages that I have, which I can answer for next 10 minutes. So let me, till then, you can unmute and ask your questions one by one, and let me read the chat messages. Okay, Nishan has raised. Nishan, go ahead.
Hi, sir.
Nishan.
So,
Okay,
yes, sir.
you asked a question a way long, I think back.
Yes,
Yes.
sir. Yes, sir. So my last question was, sir, there's this recent topic of Iran versus Pakistan as well. So
Yeah.
should we consider it under a hot topic?
It's a hot topic. I don't think anyone will ask you. Sometimes out of curiosity, panel might ask. So what happens is some people say they are interested in geopolitics, and this is a very recent happening. They might ask for what is happening between, India or Iran and Pakistan. So maybe knowing a bit of it is helpful. I think it's the Shia Sunni conflict that is there.
Yes, sir.
Uh,
Yes.
yeah, but I don't think so. You need to go very deep into that. But yes, since you have said it, I would suggest everyone should at least read one article around it of the recent happenings. What happened that Iran attacked a few and Pakistan retaliated back.
Got it, sir. Thank you.
Give me to okay. Hi, sir. IFT4. I have answered the IFT part. Blackwater was the PMC. Yes, PMCs have been used since historical times. Right? If someone watches Game of Thrones, you have seen like it's a fictional writing, but PMCs have been there. Actually, this thing came across with the recent Wagner Group. It became really prominent. Uh, Nanjing massacre, that's correct. That's the Japanese imperialist forces within China. It's very, very troubled memory for Chinese. That's where US-China allied, and US was against the imperialist forces of Japan. In fact, India was also against the imperialist forces against Japan. The stand of the Indian National Congress back then and Panditji was against the Japanese imperialist forces. They didn't want the British colonials to be replaced by the Japanese. Whereas it's a complex manifestation because at the same point, Netaji wanted assistance from the Japanese forces to defeat the British. So complex there, but yeah, there was again Operation Thunderbolt. I'm not sure I'm aware of it, or maybe I am. I think, but maybe I can't recollect. Just a few back, UN charge Israel with genocide. That's happening. Humanitarian questions are being raised on Israel. So right, that's the complex matter. That's why I said I read something around Saudi Arabia being the mediator, and there might be a solution. South Africa accused them of genocide. Yes, they've been accused of genocide now, with civilian hospitals being raided to ground and all other things, right? These topics will not come up if you don't mention geopolitics. But sometimes some of these topics are also current awareness topics. So some bit of it, knowing them is helpful. But if you mention geopolitics, you might get ventured into maybe a follow-through questions on that, one or two or three. But if you don't mention geopolitics, I don't think so it's going to come in. But as a VAT topic, certain of these certain topics like US, China, Russia, and all are slightly current topics. There could be a VAT topic around it or a extempore around it, because these are matters more than geopolitics, also certain to a certain degree of general awareness. So with that aspect, you need to know about it. And for someone who asked this question, today's session is enough for you to know about these issues if geopolitics is not your interest. For someone who has interest in geopolitics, today's session is just a starting point to explore a bit further so that they can prepare their ground for up and running. Good enough. Any more questions? Otherwise, I'm good to close the session. Till then, let me shut down the recording as well. Unknown topics. That's a prominent good question. Who asked this? Venkat.